của người phụ nữ khiêu vũ giữa bầy sói.
Là người phụ nữ duy nhất đặt bút ký vào hiệp định Paris, là nữ bộ trưởng ngoại giao đầu tiên của Việt Nam, nổi tiếng với câu nói người Mỹ có thể lên mặt trăng rồi trở về an toàn, nhưng sang Việt Nam thì tôi không chắc.
Khí chất và thần thái của người phụ nữ khiêu vũ giữa bầy sói.
Là người phụ nữ
Đường phố Hà Nội năm 1896.
Hoàng hậu, viếng thăm Vatican năm 1939.
Bé đó dễ thương, mắt nó đẹp như mắt bé. Đừng sợ, con bé đó sau này sẽ khổ.
Nét đẹp phụ nữ Việt Nam 100 năm trước, ảnh chụp tại Hà Đông vào khoảng năm 1920, bà cô con gái của Tổng đốc Hoàng Trọng Phu. Sĩ văn cao thời trẻ.
Vàng huyền đáy nước phai xóa đường đi. Một mùa thi lá khô rơi rụng.
Vua Khải Định.
Ông vua muốn thuyết phục ông đại sứ thì chỉ còn cách dùng sắc đẹp nam phương.
Xe lam chạy tuyến Bà Quẹo Sài Gòn Cầu Muối năm 1980. Tiệm ảnh thanh xuân.
Hình ảnh Hoàng hậu Nam Phương mặc lễ phục cung đình Nhật Bình và khăn vành đã được Đức Giáo Hoàng tiếp đón khi bà đến thăm Tòa Thánh Vatican ở Rome năm 1939.
Trên đường Cái Quan năm 1898.
Ảnh chụp một thiếu nữ miền Bắc khoảng năm 1883.
Vàng
chính là những câu từ mà nhân dân ta đã chửi ông Phạm Xuân Ẩn, và vị anh hùng tình báo này vẫn im lặng nhẫn nhục vài chục năm để hoàn thành nhiệm vụ, dẫu bị cả đất nước hiểu lầm trong một thời gian rất dài. Phạm Xuân Ẩn, một nhà báo Việt Nam phục vụ cho quân đội Mỹ, ông được người Mỹ tin tưởng tuyệt đối, nhưng thực tế, thiếu tướng quân đội nhân dân Việt Nam Phạm Xuân Ẩn là một điệp viên hoàn hảo. Trong suốt 20 năm che giấu thân phận, nguy hiểm sống chết cận kề và hoạt động trong lòng địch, ông đã gửi hàng loạt tin tình báo quan trọng của kẻ thù về với quân ta, giúp cho cách mạng có nhiều chiến thắng chiến lược cực kỳ quan trọng, mở ra ngày thống nhất đất nước 30 tháng 4 lịch sử. Sau năm 1975, Phạm Xuân Ẩn vẫn im lặng không nhận công lao. Khi sự thật được công bố thì cả đất nước Việt Nam mới biết rằng vị anh hùng tình báo này đã phải chịu đựng những gì và công lao của ông thì nhiều đến thế nào.
Thế nào là khuôn vàng thước ngọc của phụ nữ Việt Nam ngày xưa?
Mọi đề xuất của ông Nixon đều rất nham hiểm nhưng chúng tôi rất hiểu. Ông ta chưa sẵn sàng rút quân Mỹ khỏi miền Nam Việt Nam.
Thưa quý vị, một trong những câu nói nổi tiếng nhất thế kỷ 20 lại thuộc về một người phụ nữ Việt Nam. Người Mỹ có thể lên mặt trăng và quay trở về thành công, còn sang Việt Nam thì chúng tôi không chắc. Đó là câu nói được dịch từ tiếng Pháp của người phụ nữ quyền lực nhất Việt Nam lúc bấy giờ, Phó Chủ tịch nước Nguyễn Thị Bình.
Mỹ phải rút quân, đó là nguyên tắc. Ông có công nhận quyền lợi dân tộc của nhân dân Việt Nam hay không? Nếu vậy, ông không thể giải thích cho sự hiện diện của Mỹ trên đất nước chúng tôi. Mỹ phải rút toàn bộ quân, đó là nguyên tắc, không cần phải bàn. Chúng ta cần bàn đến những vấn đề khác.
Hoàn toàn nhất trí.
Nhưng ông ta không đồng ý.
Họ đã nói sẵn sàng đàm phán việc rút quân.
Không, thưa quý vị, đó là đàm phán tiến trình rút quân ở số nhiều. Như vậy nghĩa là gì? Nghĩa là các bên đều rút quân. Các ông đều biết rằng mọi đề xuất của ông Nixon đều rất nham hiểm nhưng chúng tôi rất hiểu. Ông ta chưa sẵn sàng rút quân Mỹ khỏi miền Nam Việt Nam.
Thưa quý vị, một trong những câu nói nổi tiếng nhất thế kỷ 20 lại thuộc về một người phụ nữ Việt Nam. Người Mỹ có thể lên mặt trăng và quay trở về thành công, còn sang Việt Nam thì chúng tôi không chắc. Đó là câu nói được dịch từ tiếng Pháp của người phụ nữ quyền lực nhất Việt Nam lúc bấy giờ, Phó Chủ tịch nước Nguyễn Thị Bình.
Mỹ phải rút quân, đó là nguyên tắc. Ông có công nhận quyền lợi dân tộc của nhân dân Việt Nam hay không? Nếu vậy, ông không thể giải thích cho sự hiện diện của Mỹ trên đất nước chúng tôi. Mỹ phải rút toàn bộ quân, đó là nguyên tắc, không cần phải bàn. Chúng ta cần bàn đến những vấn đề khác.
Hoàn toàn nhất trí.
Nhưng ông ta không đồng ý.
Họ đã nói sẵn sàng đàm phán việc rút quân.
Không, thưa quý vị, đó là đàm phán tiến trình rút quân ở số nhiều. Như vậy nghĩa là gì? Nghĩa là các bên đều rút quân. Các ông đều biết rằng mọi đề xuất của ông Nixon đều rất nham hiểm nhưng chúng tôi rất hiểu. Ông ta chưa sẵn sàng rút quân Mỹ khỏi miền Nam Việt Nam.
Ta lại thầm nồng cùng nhau, đường xanh như lá, bạc như lá vôi.
Một cô gái đang đứng sàng gạo năm 1867.
Câu nhỏ nhỏ miếng trầu hôi, này của xuân hương mới quê rồi.
Từ Sơn trên đường Hà Nội đi Bắc Ninh, những ngôi nhà lá trên đường phố, ảnh chụp năm 1894. Làng phủ Từ Sơn trên đường Hà Nội đi Bắc Ninh, những ngôi nhà lá trên đường phố, ảnh chụp năm 1894. cảnh Hà Nội năm 1940. Khung cảnh trên đường từ Lạng Sơn về Hà Nội, đò cập bến bên sông Đuống, năm 1896. Trên đường
Chợ bưởi dịp Giáp Tết năm 1928, thời điểm đó chợ nằm ở địa phận tỉnh Hà Đông cũ. Chợ bưởi dịp
cô gái người dân tộc Thái rất đẹp, năm 1930. Hình ảnh cô gái người dân tộc Thái rất đẹp, năm 1930. Vùng ngoại ô Hà Nội, ảnh chụp năm 1900. Vùng ngoại ô Hà Nội, ảnh chụp năm 1900.
The French are struggling to pin down and destroy. By 1953, Ho Chi Minh's communist guerrillas have fought the French army for 7 years in Vietnam. The French are struggling to pin down and destroy the elusive Viet Minh revolutionaries. They now hope U.S. support and a new ambitious outpost will force Ho Chi Minh's troops into a final decisive battle in the valley of Dien Bien Phu. By early 1953, the Indochina War is a stalemate. Both sides, the Viet Minh and French Union, have experienced their fair share of victories and defeats. Ho Chi Minh and Vo Nguyen Gia's Viet Minh forces wiped out the French border forts and garrisons in 1950 and ambushed a major French patrol in 1952. But they've been unable to capture significant French positions defended by artillery and air power. In their attacks on Vinh Yen in 1951 and Nha San in 1952, they suffer huge casualties for no gain. Meanwhile, French Union troops have been able to hold the Red River Delta, but are unable to pursue Viet Minh forces and destroy them on their terms. To solve the problem, Paris sends General Henri Navarre to Indochina in May 1953. He's been instructed to find an honorable way out of the war. But to do this, he needs victories on the battlefield to gain a diplomatic advantage. He knows that his paratrooper and Foreign Legion forces are vital to offensive operations, but their manpower is being used up defending almost 900 garrisons all across Indochina. So Navarre decides to abandon many remote garrisons, including Nha San, and consolidate forces in the Red River Delta in anticipation of a future offensive. In central and southern Vietnam, commando-style raids will mop up isolated Viet Minh groups, but elsewhere, he focuses on training up local Vietnamese forces. Once they can take over garrison duties, French troops will be freed up for mobile operations. He also asked the United States for more help. In the US, former World War II Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower is now in the White House. He's concerned about communism's spread in Europe and is fearful of a similar fate in Asia. In July 1953, the Korean War ends in a stalemate and the peninsula's division. On one hand, the Korean War showed the ability of international forces to stem the tide of communism, but on the other, it came at a huge cost and with no definitive victory. The Korea experience also shifts U.S. attitudes towards Ho Chi Minh. Previously, Truman's administration had been sympathetic to Vietnamese independence movements opposing French colonialism. An American OSS team had even trained and supplied Ho Chi Minh and Pho Nguyen Gia in August 1945 to fight the Japanese who were then occupying Indochina. However, Eisenhower's administration now sees the hand of monolithic Soviet communism behind the Viet Minh movement. The U.S. agrees to bankroll Navao's plan with a $400 million aid package, but only on the condition that France abandons planned negotiations with Ho Chi Minh and accepts West German remilitarization in Europe. Soon, Viet Minh movements force a French response, since the revolutionaries are extending operations into Laos. Such a move would extend the war beyond the range of French mobile groups based in the Red River Delta, making future French operations much harder. Navao decides to interrupt the Viet Minh supply routes into Laos by seizing the strategically important village of Dien Bien Phu in an airborne attack. On November 20th, 1953, 6 French parachute battalions drop into the area. They encounter light resistance, although even this is more than what they anticipated. Major Bijard of the 6th Colonial Parachute Battalion recalled. When we came down on November 20th, we were told there would be no Vietnamese. But there were 2 companies exactly where we jumped. Some of my men were killed before they even touched the ground. Others were stabbed where they landed. After the French secured the area, they paradropped bulldozers and other equipment to create a new airhead. The plan is for Dien Bien Phu to serve as a base for offensive raids and patrols into the Viet Minh rear areas. Much like at Nha San, it will be resupplied entirely by air via its 2 airstrips in the valley. In early 1954, French forces turned Dien Bien Phu into a fortified position with 9 defensive bastions, with an inner and outer ring. Most of these are on the flat valley floor next to the airstrips, although several are located on the hills above. The French fly in troops and equipment, including artillery, 10 M24 Chaffee tanks, and 9 Bearcat fighter bombers. To deliver the tanks, they break the vehicles down into multiple parts and reassemble them on site after delivery. They also bring in Vietnamese and Algerian women to work at the base brothel. A near constant stream of transports eventually deliver around 10,800 men to the camp by January, many of them colonial or French allied Vietnamese troops. Colonel Charles Pirot, commander of artillery at Dien Bien Phu, insists that his guns will wipe out any Viet Minh artillery that might approach. No Viet Minh gun will fire 3 rounds without being destroyed. But the Dien Bien Phu position has some critical flaws, which are quickly recognized by the Viet Minh. It's 275 kilometers from Hanoi, much farther than Nha San. Both air supply and support will be slower to arrive, while it's also out of the range of ground-based French mobile troops. Since it's been developed as an offensively oriented camp, its defenses are also not as prepared as at Nha San. There are large gaps between bastions, some of which are isolated and far from headquarters. The French artillery at Dien Bien Phu is poorly protected, and with only 60 guns, is not proportional to the size of the camp. Perhaps most important of all, much of the camp, including the vital airstrip, is overlooked by forested hills. The French know about these vulnerabilities, but don't consider them critical. Locally based aircraft, including a handful of early helicopters, can provide constant air support, while the hills are generally considered impassable for heavy equipment. In any case, the Viet Minh have never shown much skill for artillery or anti-aircraft tactics. Isolated bastions will merely lure the Viet Minh in, where, much like at Nha San, the French can destroy them. Viet Minh military commander Pho Nguyen Gia moves 50,000 regular Viet Minh troops into the area, about 1/3 of his total regular force. Furthermore, with the Korean War over, the Viet Minh can count on more Chinese support. Viet Minh troops undergo training in artillery, heavy weapons, and engineering, and they're now equipped with large-caliber artillery, including American models captured in Korea by the Chinese, and more sophisticated anti-aircraft weapons. The Central Military Committee of the Chinese Communist Party tells its advisors in Indochina, to eliminate the enemy totally and to win the final victory in the campaign, you should use overwhelming artillery fire. Do not save artillery shells. We will supply and deliver sufficient shells to you. The French notice the build-up and attempt to bomb Viet Minh columns on roads and known jungle paths. However, an army of Vietnamese porters cut new hidden paths through the jungle, eventually totaling over 500 kilometers. By January, around 240 Viet Minh artillery pieces, heavy mortars, recoilless rifles, and flak guns have been maneuvered into the hills surrounding Dien Bien Phu. Such a concentration of manpower and equipment is a gamble for Jia, as it leaves other areas undefended and could result in the loss of precious heavy weapons. However, negotiations are planned for April, and he knows that whoever wins at Dien Bien Phu will gain a diplomatic advantage. Jia's guns opened fire on January 31st, 1954, and continue to fire from time to time for 6 weeks. The Vietnamese gunners are arranging their guns and observing French counter-battery fire. By March, the valley is a moonscape and the French await the coming assault. War reporter André Lebon recorded a conversation between two French troopers. "It's going to be like Na San, only 10 times bigger, or almost verdun. This time they'll put all their big artillery here and will show us what they've learned about big war fighting." On March 11th, the 1st Viet Minh probing attacks target the northern Gabrielle, Anne-Marie, and Béatrice bastions. Isolated on a hilltop, Béatrice is especially exposed. Viet Minh assaults show more sophistication than at Na San. Before an attack, they pound French positions with accurate artillery, collapsing bunkers and knocking out guns. A legionnaire at Béatrice recalls the barrage. "We are all surprised and ask ourselves how the Viets have been able to find so many guns capable of producing an artillery fire of such power. Shells rain down on us without stopping, like a hailstorm on a fall evening. Bunker after bunker, trench after trench collapsed, burying under them men and weapons." Viet Minh diversionary attacks prevent the French from sending help, and Béatrice is overrun on March 14th with 75% French casualties. Next, Jia targets Gabrielle, and despite a French armored counterattack, that position also falls. French counter-battery fire is ineffective and fires 25% of their ammunition on the first day. As resupply aircraft attempt to land, they encounter a hail of anti-aircraft fire from the surrounding hills. Meanwhile, artillery hits the runway as well. Vietnamese shells destroy C-47 transport planes on the ground and damage all but 2 of the Bearcats. On March 15th, with much of the French artillery destroyed or ineffective, Colonel Pirot apologizes to his officers before killing himself with a grenade. To many, the battle already seems lost, but the remaining French troops fight on and reinforcements are dropped into the camp. Up to 4,300 French troops, some with no parachute experience, will be dropped into Dien Bien Phu from mid-March to early May. In early April, French paratrooper Captain Pierre Fauroux jumped into Dien Bien Phu at night. "I jumped with the first wave, close to midnight. No sooner did my parachute open than I found myself in the middle of an extraordinary spectacle. Anti-aircraft fire, illumination flares, tracer rounds. It was a real Bastille Day fireworks show." French nurses are often on board return flights to care for the wounded, and one, Geneviève de Galard, ends up staying on the base throughout the entire siege to care for the wounded, earning her the Légion d'honneur. The French troops now reinforce the main camp while their leaders discuss 3 ways out of the developing disaster. Operation Condor would see a relief column march on Dien Bien Phu. Operation Albatross would be a garrison breakout towards the French positions. Or Operation Vulture, which would be a request to the US military for more support. The French decide to pursue both Condor and Vulture with Albatross held in reserve. However, it's extremely difficult to gather the transport and troops needed for Condor, and commanders are skeptical. Instead, Navarre focuses on Vulture. He asks the US to lend France heavy B-29 bombers, which can blow away Viet Minh artillery and anti-aircraft positions. Officially, the B-29s will be flown by French crews, but given the training difficulties, it's debatable how likely this is. The Americans understand that the French are asking for direct US military involvement. The request does have supporters in Washington. Secretary of State John Dulles and Vice President Richard Nixon support armed intervention, perhaps even the use of atomic bombs. But others aren't so keen. By 1954, the US is already covering almost 80% of French military expenditure in Indochina, and General Matthew Ridgway, former commander in Korea, suggests further commitment will bog down resources and likely provoke Chinese intervention. He's joined by House Minority Leader Lyndon B. Johnson, who argues any intervention should be part of an international coalition, including Britain and other democratic Asian states. President Eisenhower writes British Prime Minister Winston Churchill to encourage a united front. If I may refer again to history, we failed to halt Hirohito, Mussolini, and Hitler by not acting in unity and in time. That marked the beginning of many years of stark tragedy and desperate peril. May it not be that our nations have learned something from that lesson? The letter gets a cool reception in Britain, where the public favors a negotiated settlement with the Viet Minh. There will be no international coalition, and consequently, no official U.S. intervention, although 37 American pilots fly 682 resupply sorties to Dien Bien Phu. They're officially employed by Civil Air Transport, an airline covertly operated by the CIA. Some historians suggest that Eisenhower knew his proposal would fail, but was looking for a way to avoid intervention while simultaneously appearing supportive of France. He later stated, "If the United States were unilaterally to permit its forces to be drawn into conflict in Indochina and in a succession of Asian wars, the end result would be to drain off our resources and to weaken our overall defensive position." So by late March, the besieged French defenders of Dien Bien Phu are on the verge of defeat. The Vietnamese have captured much of the northern camp and nearly put the airfield out of action. With no U.S. support coming, the French prepare a relief column in Laos, although poor weather and Viet Minh activity will get in the way. Meanwhile, French air support is ineffective against the Viet Minh. With Dien Bien Phu's own planes destroyed, it must rely on air support from the Red River Delta. But heavy anti-aircraft fire means few planes remain in the area to properly spot and hit Viet Minh targets. As napalm supplies are used up, the French resort to dropping lazy dog cluster bombs, anti-personnel weapons consisting of 11,200 sharpened, finned flechettes which could penetrate jungle cover over a wide area with deadly effect. Undeterred, the Viet Minh continue their assault. On March 30th, they target bastions Dominique 1 and 2, as well as Hélène 1, 2, and 4 in the so-called Battle of the Five Hills. Despite some French success with quad-mounted 50 caliber anti-aircraft guns used in a ground role, they lose parts of Dominique and Hélène in heavy fighting. The French do launch some successful counterattacks, but in reality, these just weaken the remaining units. With casualties among legionnaires and paratroopers growing, the defense increasingly falls to French-allied Vietnamese, Algerian, and Moroccan auxiliary units. With fighting raging in the east, the Viet Minh attack the west of the headquarters, targeting bastions Françoise and Huguette. Viet Minh casualties are very heavy, and Jia admits the fighting for Huguette is testing his soldiers' nerve. The principal trait of that phase of the battle has been the violent character of the combat. The battle having lasted a very long time, more troops, who had to fight without interruption, became fatigued and are worn and are faced with great nervous tension. Our forces have not been able to avoid decimation, which requires rapid reorganization and reinforcement. To avoid a collapse in morale, Jia resorts to siege tactics to break the heavily fortified headquarters. Chinese engineers arrive, and Viet Minh troops dig sapping tunnels, assault trenches, and other siege works to close up to French positions. Since mid-April, the French only hold an area roughly 1.5 kilometers in diameter, and their supplies are running low. Transport planes attempt to paradrop more supplies, but many fall on Viet Minh positions. To make matters even worse for the French, since April 22nd, Viet Minh ambushes and monsoon rains have slowed the relief effort. By early May, the French defenders were under a hail of artillery fire in flooded trenches. Captain Fourreux recalls. On the afternoon of May 6th, Major Brechignac asked me to go with a radio operator toward the center of the fighting to look for a less pulverized place where we could reassemble the surviving elements of the battalion. I advanced through the trenches in mud up to my chest. The shells never ceased to fall. At a bend in the trench, I lost sight of the radio operator. He must have been killed by a shell and swallowed up by the mud. I realized then that the end was at hand. In the final assaults, a new Chinese weapon arrives on the battlefield. 6-barreled rocket launchers similar to the Second World War German Nebelwerfer. The Viet Minh used them for the last barrages on the headquarters positions, which comes under direct assault on May 7th. By 6 p.m., they've taken the main camp. Now, only the isolated French bastion of Isabelle holds out. Under full Viet Minh attack, the defense is hopeless. With one defender describing conditions as, quote, hell in a very small place, the French decide to break out to the south in multiple directions. Most, though, will be killed or captured, and only 78 French troops are able to escape from...
Okay, stop. Do not book your hotel on Expedia or Booking.com until you know this.
Dien Bien Phu. On May 8th, while France celebrates the 9th anniversary of the Allied victory over Germany, relief units confirmed Dien Bien Phu's fall with a single code word: Austerlitz. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu is a disaster for the French colonial authorities. 2,300 French troops are killed, 6,400 wounded, and 9,000 captured. Viet Minh casualties may be as high as 30,000, but Ho Chi Minh secures an important victory on the eve of the negotiations. Despite significant French and Allied military personnel remaining in Indochina, Dien Bien Phu signals the end of the French will to fight. The war is already unpopular or even irrelevant in metropolitan France. A May 1953 survey reports that only 23% of French respondents took an active interest in what was now termed la sale guerre, the dirty war. The First Indochina War would cost the lives of almost 79,000 French Union troops, including 15,000 North Africans. Up to 200,000 Viet Minh may have also been killed. At the Geneva Accords in July 1954, the US, Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and China strike a deal. Laos and Cambodia become independent kingdoms, and Vietnam is divided into two states along the 17th parallel. A northern communist state under Ho Chi Minh, and a southern non-communist one led by Bao Dai and his Prime Minister Ngo Dinh Diem. In exchange, the Viet Minh withdraw all units to the north in anticipation of Vietnam-wide elections in 1956. The now independent Republic of Vietnam in the south expels French administrators and troops in favor of American support. For Ho Chi Minh and his supporters, the deal is not a good one. They'd long fought for a unified Vietnamese state, however the Chinese pressure them to compromise. China has achieved its national security goals of creating a secure frontier and preventing US military intervention. Creating a unified and powerful independent Vietnamese communist state with a strong nationalist ideology might not actually be beneficial to Chinese regional aspirations, especially given historical tensions between Chinese and Vietnamese states. Instead, China hopes to pursue a peace offensive in the coming years to legitimate its state and shore up its diplomatic and strategic gains. For Viet Minh leader Le Duan, it's a bitter pill to swallow. I traveled by wagon to the south. Along the way, compatriots came out to greet me, for they thought we'd won a victory. It was so painful. For the US, a North Vietnamese communist state is cause for alarm. Soon, Eisenhower is talking of other Asian states potentially succumbing to communism like falling dominoes. American leaders now discuss protecting South Vietnam from its communist neighbor. And with the French out of the picture, they feel they can do so without the taint of colonialism. So in 1954, Indochina's struggles, especially Vietnam's, are far from over. And neither was the Cold War over. 1 year after the death of Stalin, the nuclear arms race between the superpowers continued, and the Soviet Union still pursued its vision of atomic-powered communism by rapidly expanding the construction of nuclear reactors across the country. If you're interested to learn more about the Soviet nuclear program from its origins in World War II to the Chernobyl disaster and beyond, you can watch our new documentary series Red Atoms exclusively on Nebula. Nebula is a streaming service that we're building together with other creators and where we don't have to worry about the algorithm or advertising guidelines and where viewers directly support creators. If you go to nebula.tv/realtimehistory, you can get 40% off an annual subscription. For just $30 a year, you can watch Red Atoms or our other Nebula original series and much more. Want to learn more about an infamous Cold War icon? Check out Tip of the Spear by Mustard about the B-2 stealth bomber. And of course, on Nebula you can also watch all our videos ad-free and usually earlier than on YouTube. That's nebula.tv/realtimehistory for 40% off an annual subscription and supporting us directly. I hope you liked this video about the most well-known battle of the First Indochina War. It's part of a series, by the way. If you want to learn more about the origin and the previous battles, check out our recent video. In the next episode, we'll start covering the US-Vietnam War as well. So stay tuned for more. As usual, you can find all our sources in the video description below. If you're watching this video on Nebula or Patreon, thank you so much for the support. We couldn't do it without you. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this is a production of Real Time History, the only history channel that always flies civil air transport.